Once again, welcome to the gathering. My name is Shauna Walton. I am on the fundraising team for the Bayou Culture Collaborative, which is an initiative of the Louisiana Folklore Society. Today's talk is going to be by Haley Blakeman, and we're going to introduce her just a little bit. She's going to be later. She just waved. Thanks, Haley. Wave again. There you go. There's Haley. And she's going to be talking about receiving communities. Actually, there's a big long title, Identifying Receiving Communities, Prioritizing Communities, and Reducing Environmental, Social, and Economic Risk. We're really excited about this talk. It's something we talk about a lot. I want to remind you who's on the BCC management team. It's a pretty flat structure, guys. So if you want to get involved, please just hop in there and let us know. Jonathan Foray, Maida Owens, Dr. Rachel Doherty at UL Lafayette, and Dr. Gary LaFleur at Nicholls State University. Jonathan isn't here with us today, nor is Gary, but Maida is here. So we'll keep going. All right. And we want to remind everybody before we start that we're not posturing ourselves as having the answers, nor do we advocate for or support any specific adaptation management plan. We're exploring the issues together, the issues and the options together. So come join, explore with us as we move forward. Our partners in this exploration are the Louisiana Folklore Society that helped create this initiative, the Center for Bayou Studies at Nicholls, the State Louisiana Folklife Program, the Center for Louisiana Studies at UL Lafayette, and the South Louisiana Wetlands Center. Thank you. We can't do it without you. And we certainly can't do it without our funders, the Louisiana Office of Cultural Development, the National Endowment for the Arts, Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities, and the Barataria-Terrebonne National Estuary Program. A big thank you to all of our funders. Every time we get together, we like to have a spotlight on a tradition or a culture, particularly a person who's a tradition bearer. And we actually, one of the things you may or may not know is the BCC in its early days often put a lot of its effort into offering what you see here called passing it on workshops. We still offer these, and they are through the Louisiana Folklife Program. And today's spotlight is going to be shared by Maida Owens. It's on Elaine Burke and Austin Clark. Maida.
Elaine Burke learned directly from Gladys Clark, who was for a long time referred to as the only person still doing Acadian brown cotton weaving and spinning. She did teach Elaine Burke with an apprenticeship years ago, and now Elaine Burke has the most in-depth knowledge of this. Austin Clark expressed interest, and they have been really working closely together, and we helped, the Passing It On workshops helped fund them doing a deeper dive. I am excited that we are having more Passing It On workshops, and I'll be announcing the availability of that in the next couple of weeks. So if you know of somebody who has a tradition that needs to be passed on, I want to hear about it.
That's great. And everybody knows how to contact Maida. I'm sure all that's in the chat. Can I ask a question? Is Austin Clark a relative of Ms. Clark?
No, just coincidence.
No, it's just a coincidence. Okay. All right. Well, see, you do not have to be a relative. If you know of anybody who should be passing on their traditions and just needs a little financial aid to help them do it, contact Maida about a Passing It On workshop. Okay, for today's program, we're going to have the lovely Haley Blakeman talking to us. Then we'll have some Q&A and discussion. Then we hope that we will get a Hope for the Coast to finish up. We'll review our position statement, let's talk about our working group meetings coming up, any other announcements. Then we will end the formal part of the meeting and have an informal discussion until 1:30. And that, guys, is when all the good tea gets spilled. So you definitely need to stay to the bitter end. Okay. Let me introduce you today. If you do not know who Haley Blakeman is, let me tell you that she is the Associate Director of the Robert Reich School of Landscape Architecture at LSU. She's also the Suzanne L. Turner Assistant Professor in that same school. And she got her Bachelor in Landscape Architecture from LSU, and she got her Master's of Urban and Regional Planning from UNO. So she's well versed in understanding this area. She is a licensed landscape architect, and she's been a creative planner for about 20 years. It has about 20 years of experience. We were just talking about one of her publications that I had read and found to be really good. This was the one about Bucktown, right?
Yes.
Yes, that I had just read. That's a part of New Orleans, or right over there. And so we're going to invite her to begin today's talk on receiving community, such an important topic.
I'll start off by saying I'm not an academic. It is my current job, but I'm more of an applied researcher. So I've worked in communities for over 20 years in private practice before I came back to teach. And so that's where this work comes from. As y'all said, I am a landscape architect, and I just want to explain a little bit why landscape architects are leading these types of climate adaptation. Landscape architects, you may have heard of them before. Just as an architect designs and builds interior spaces and buildings, we design exterior spaces where people come together and be together outside of buildings. So some of the reasons we are contributing to these climate change solutions are we're trained to be connectors. We're trained to think of systems that we can bring together and people that we can bring together and overlap to accomplish complex solutions. We're very process focused, so we not only are iterative as we do our design work, as we look at a problem, we think of a solution, we kind of critique it a bit and go back to the drawing board over and over again. But we also capture the metrics along the way, so we're able to see if it's working and adjust along the way. We are big collaborators, multidisciplinary collaborators with all sorts of planners, designers, engineers, architects, but also with social scientists like sociologists and anthropologists. And we're trained to be facilitators, so to bring people together. And so it's kind of a natural fit for us to be working in this realm. Some things that y'all already know, but I'll touch on quickly. Louisiana drains 2/3 of our country down to our coast. I always love this map just to see all the water that actually comes through our state. 2 million people in Louisiana live in our coastal areas. I know that y'all have probably seen this before, but all the things that we not only contribute to the state's economy, but to the country's economy here in our state. I'll have to explain to this group how important our coast is to not only the state, but also to the rest of the country. We also have quite a few challenges between sea level rise, oil spills, storms, canals that have chopped up our wetlands. Our land is, not only is the water coming up, but our land is subsiding and going down. And levees that trap that sediment from getting to those wetlands to replenish them as well. So you've hopefully seen this before. It's kind of a Friday night in Tiger Stadium, but we lose about a football field every 100 minutes. So that's just to kind of give everybody else sort of context of how quickly we're losing land in Louisiana. But it's not just land. In the next 50 years, about 4,100 square miles are at risk. So that's what that looks like. But it's, again, not just land. Those are communities. Those are places where people live and ties to land that people have that are from those areas. So when we talk about it in land, it's really places where people live. So I've done a lot of work in coastal communities. This is Madisonville on the North Shore, who When we started working there, they did not think that they were an actual coastal community, even though they are on the shores of Lake Pontchartrain, which is directly influenced by tides from the coast. So they get backwater flooding from Lake Pontchartrain, which is one of their biggest challenges. It's not actually rainwater flooding. And so when we started working with them, we're like, no, you are a coastal community because you're influenced by coastal tides. So these are the new maps from CPRA, and the work that we did for this was funded by the CPRA. And so you can see kind of the flood depths that are projected in the future for the areas along the coast. CPRA's projections say by 2050, 1.2 million people in Louisiana will be affected by sea level rise. If you remember, I said about 2 million people live along our coast, and so 1.2 million of them will be affected by sea level rise by 2050. Some people will adapt in place, and some will, on their own, at some point, decide that they need to relocate. This isn't new. This has been happening for many years along our coast. As you can see from this map from LA Safe, between 2000 and 2010, the red numbers are places that people have left, the percentages of people who have moved out. And what typically tends to happen is they kind of leapfrog. They go up a couple of communities near friends and family that they know. And so the green are places that have gained population over that time. So this continues to happen. A couple of quotes. We did work with the National Association of Realtors when I was the Center of Planning Excellence. 1 in 4 coastal residents have thought about moving, and that was in 2013. And 4 out of 10 know friends and neighbors who've already left. And of course, after we have a big weather event like Katrina, people evacuate and a lot of times never come back. So I just want to bring this back out to the United States and point out, I love this map because it shows very clearly how many big cities are along our coastline throughout the United States. It's not just us. This is all over the United States where people are living along our coastlines. So to put that in perspective, up to 7.8 million people are living below projected high tide line in 2100. So it's a lot of people across the coast of the United States that'll be facing the same thing that we are facing. It's just happening here a little bit faster. So federal funding is really shifting from disaster response and emergency management to disaster reduction through prevention in the first place. And then how do we adapt to that climate change as well? So it's really a good time for us to be thinking about how can we use that, access that federal funding to support our communities. I heard a very impactful presentation by Dr. Ayanna Johnson. And she kind of described the vision of how we envision the future with climate change. And she said, I feel like we're sort of sauntering away from the apocalypse instead of sprinting towards the future we want. And this would really change the way that I thought about it. What is the future that we want? And how do we hurry up and get there instead of everything is terrible, right? And so I've really changed the way that I think about potential receiving communities, places that as people choose to move because of environmental factors, they really are looking for places that embrace them, that welcome them, and that reduce the risk. We certainly don't want to take someone away from an environmental risk along the coast and place them in a place that not only is there environmental risk, but there might be social risk and economic vulnerability too. So we want to make sure that we're thinking ahead and putting people in the best position possible if and when they do have to leave. So this work, again, was funded by the CPRA, and it builds on their protection and restoration efforts. So their charge really is to prepare and adapt and protect the coast for 50 years. We're a good ways into that 50 years already. And so their charge is really to stave off coastal land loss so we can make some plans in the meantime. And so that's why they're starting to think about receiving communities. So the goal of this work, this funded research, was to identify potential receiving communities, use data to understand their individual gaps in resilience, and then really take that federal funding that is changing a little bit and direct it towards those receiving communities so you can reduce some of that vulnerability. We want to make sure we're doing that for existing residents, but also residents that may move there in the future. So we did a lot of research of the literature, thinking about what are the barriers to retreat. If people are living in a situation where they keep getting flooded or keep getting hit by hurricanes, what are some of those barriers that make it unable for them to move if they would like to? Property values, certainly government mistrust and not being transparent. Environmental injustices, culturally insensitive communication is a big one. Definitely attachment to place and place identity. High levels of satisfaction. I mean, living along our coast is a beautiful place to be. Resource barriers, low mobility, they may not be able to leave. And then dependence on the natural resources that are along our coast. If not planned for, when people migrate, it can reinforce social, institutional, and environmental barriers when they go somewhere else. Some of those can be lack of mental health support or disability support, healthcare access, loss of a home or land. Also loss of shared property resources. A lot of our communities help each other out and you know, if you need some pipe or if something happens to your house, your neighbor lets you borrow stuff. So really losing those cultural resources and social resources, sorry. We also looked at kind of comparing piecemeal acquisition. So if I get a buyout on my particular lot and I move somewhere else versus a coordinated approach where, you know, people of a neighborhood or a group or a town move together, and kind of the difference between those two. And what we found out from that is that people need to really decide when it's time to relocate themselves based on their own perceived risk. That could be environmental risk, but it could also be social or economic risk as well. A critical mass is needed to preserve culture and social infrastructure and related lifestyles. So if people are moving piecemeal, it tends to break down that cultural essence. Piecemeal acquisition fosters community fragmentation. It undermines traditional cultures and concentrates those vulnerabilities because people lose their social network. And then long-term engagement, trust, community situation of development and housing design, and creation of public spaces is necessary as people decide to move. We also did a good bit of interviews. Some of you that I interviewed are on this call, so thank you for showing up, to find out what really attracts coastal migrants to receiving communities. Certainly employment is a big one. So not only just available employment, but demand for workers and high wages. Affordable quality housing. I can't emphasize quality housing in there because sometimes the housing is affordable, but it's not necessarily quality housing. And the same is true for education. From kindergarten all the way through higher ed, quality physical and mental health care, food and water security, proximity to transportation connections to the working coast. It's really important for them to be able to get back to their land on the coast, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And a place that's accepting and diverse that will not exacerbate racial, cultural, social, and economic inequities. And then those kinship networks. They want to go where they have friends and family, and they're able to fit into that network. And certainly festivals, cultural events, and clubs definitely attract people. So these things helped inform some of the things that we looked at for those receiving communities. Some other things, themes from our interviews, there tends to be a lack of affordable housing. Every single person we talk to in communities said they don't have enough affordable quality housing. Data sharing between governmental agencies or even lack of useful data was a challenge. We have lots of data in Louisiana, but it's not necessarily shared or useful. The capacity to access federal funding and direct growth. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 or 4 people in a town running the whole thing. And so they have very, very little time to do long-term planning and access federal funding and compete with larger communities. And then the lack of non-structural adaptation funding, though I do see that as definitely changing in the last just couple of years, which is great to see. Updated and enforced building codes. Sometimes those building codes are on the books, but they're not necessarily enforced. Food festivals, visiting friends, and cultural events allow people to test receiving communities, and they really do aid in social cohesion. When people come together and have a shared good time, that's what we do in Louisiana, right? We eat, we listen to music, and we be together. So that's really helpful. Physical proximity to the coast is really important, especially to access family land or work or friends. And the picture here is cattle that's on the coast, that's on family land that they go back and forth during the week from their home in Lake Charles and then down to the coast to tend their cattle. So maintaining that access is important. Rural and small city options. The FEMA insurance rating updates will cause people to move. And effective communication of risk, forecasts, and opportunities is critical to help people make the right decision for themselves. So now I'm going to switch a little bit to, that was kind of all the background information. I'm going to switch a little bit to the methodology. Very quickly, it is in the report that Maida posted, but I'll just give you a quick background of it. First, we took the flood depth and land loss for from the CPRA. And again, I should stop and say that we went up to Alexandria, not because we don't think people are going to go north of that, because they already are, but because we had limited funding. So I don't want to leave anybody out. I just wanted to say that that's why we went that far up. So we took the flood depth and land loss. We took FEMA flood zones, and then we isolated communities that had the majority of land outside of those situations. Then we added education, health and environment, and social and economic indices from the child opportunity indices. This is through the CDC. And so they took a whole lot of information from the census and kind of pulled out chunks of information and scores basically for each town. And we use that because they've already done a lot of the hard work for us, but it's also really accessible to towns and to smaller governments. And then we added a lot of qualitative indicators of existing social, environmental, and economic capacity, which I'll go over in just a second. And that gave us our kind of rank of potential receiving communities. So there are about 20 of those resilience factors that we looked at in social, environmental, and economic. Some of the social resilience factors included social services, food banks, healthcare access and quality, education, and community cohesion opportunities. Do they have football games that communities can go to at night? Do they have festivals, places for people, bring people together? Environmental resilience factors, including flood risk, of course, access to prime agricultural land, because that's really important to be able to grow fresh food nearby that's not taken over by development. Protection of sensitive habitat, air and water quality, and even proximity to evacuation routes. And from economic perspective, cultural identity and sense of place is really important when people are looking for a place to move. alternative transportation infrastructure, economic diversity and job training, expansion potential. Is there places to grow that, again, is not in sensitive habitat or in prime ag land? And is the housing cost, variety, and quality? Some people need apartments. They don't need something big. Some people need a very large lot and house for their family. So need to have different opportunities of housing. So we came up with 26 communities using that methodology with ample space to grow and low flood risk. And then we took 3, if y'all are wondering about that list, it's in the report if you need to go back and look at which communities were in there. Then we pulled out 3 paradigms. So these are just examples that we went further into. And that's so other communities can use those examples, those models in different categories. One is an urban model. And for that, we picked Hammond. So it's a single town or city that scored with ample social, economic, and environmental resources. So they had a lot of things to offer people already. The second one was multiple small towns near a city that provide options for friends and families that wish to live nearby, but want different things. So we heard a lot from people that, I would like to live in a small town because that's where I'm from. I'm used to living in a small town along the coast, but my kids want to be near a university or near a town, or we need a hospital close by or something like that. And so that example was Addison Bruley. And then the last one is a rural renaissance. And our example there was Sunset. So it's a single city or town with kind of good bones, but lacks social, economic, and environmental resources that can be fulfilled with some federal funding. So then we went and gave, based on their resilience gaps, we gave some recommendations on how to plug those gaps with that federal funding. We looked at their strengths. It might be something like healthcare access or quality, affordable housing stock. And then we, again, outlined ways that they could improve that resilience. And then we also outlined on the bottom potential receiving communities that were similar to that paradigm. So getting to our findings, some of the big kind of takeaways were, along with protection, restoration of coastal areas, planning for migration is critical to our long-term resilience. If we're not planning for that now, we're really missing the boat. Another finding is some communities are already better positioned to receive people. They already have some of those resources that can help support people moving. And then data shows ways to improve the resilience and potential receiving communities. And finally, to attract people dislocated by climate change while improving the quality of life for all residents. So if we are able to fill some of those resilience gaps, we can not only attract new people, we can help people that already live there too. And then this is, we took some of those recommendations from each of those towns and started outlining federal funding that already exists that would match some of those things. So when a planner or a city official looks at some projects, they are able to add on some of that federal funding. So how can cities and towns use this resource? First, it's just a conversation starter. It's a conversation is, do they want to be a receiving community or not? We've talked to some communities that are like, yes, absolutely. We would love to have more people here. That would be fantastic. We've talked to other communities that are like, thank you, no. We don't want anybody else to move to our town, and that's totally fine. We use, as I said earlier, CPRA data, which is open source, the CDC's Child Opportunity Index, and census data, so everything is easily accessible. Try to use a holistic view of resilience. It's not just about environmental concerns, not just rising water or wind. Outlined critical support for current and future residents, even if they're not a receiving community. So if they decide they don't want to be a receiving community, they can still use this to improve their resilience. We also targeted projects that fit local needs, yet meet federal funding requirements, so you can pull that federal funds. And then really think about when we're creating or designing public spaces, we make sure that they're addressing multiple resilience factors. So resettlement, along with protection and restoration, is a critical part of how we adapt to our changing coast. Individuals, planners, designers, administrators, we all need access to information to plan long-term. So this really is just meant to be a tool for people to make decisions moving forward. Individual people need to decide on their own when and if they move based on their perceived risk. And that risk is different for everyone. Adaptation is not just infrastructure and flood reduction. There's definitely social and economic components too. And oftentimes people who are leaving the coast have even more social and economic demands and needs. We need to be thinking large scale, but acting small scale. So thinking about the whole system, but really taking into account each site that we're dealing with. And then federal funds are definitely available. More and more federal funds are available every day, but we have to communicate that long-term resilience, and they're part of a system. I mean, for me, it's always about the people. You know, as our coastline continues to change in response to climate change, my hope is that people stay connected to the land, to each other, and to their culture.
We had some good questions during the presentation. Sam Oliver asked you to define non-structural adaptation.
So that is a term that is defined by CPRA. And so they have adaptation, and it makes it sound like it's a structure like a levee versus not. It's a levee is non-structural, actually. And so they have, it's really hard to explain. CPRA has an outline of both of those on their website.
So everybody should go check it out.
Yeah.
What would you say, Sam?
So, I mean, there's a formal designation, but it's not specifically like physical infrastructure versus programmatic.
Right.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, we've got some hands raised. Mark, you had your hand up first. Do you want to go?
Sure. I was just had a question about that slide you had about piecemeal versus coordinated approach. And you indicated that, I mean, experience has shown that individuals need to decide on their own when they are ready to move, which kind of makes sense. Everybody's on their own timeline.
Yeah.
And has their own approach to risk and so on. And at the same time, you mentioned that there's downsides to that in terms of the loss of the social fabric. So I guess my question is, what kinds of mitigating approaches are you taking to that in terms of like reconstituting a social fabric?
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard nut to crack, right? Because they seem sort of in opposition to each other. You know, if Maid and I live next to each other, I may need to move because of very different reasons and different timeline than Maida needs to move. But I like having her as a neighbor. So one of the strategies we've kind of talked about and at the state level is, do we have a coordinated kind of agreement with multiple communities of, are there sister communities on the coast that have a sister community in North Louisiana that says, we would love to have you, please come here. One of those kind of ways they've tested that out is a lot of the communities on the coast have a sister community for when there's a hurricane. And so they go there and stay in their community facilities to ride out the storm. And so there's agreements with communities that are already set up like that. And so those are things that we could build on. We can do some of those workshops that Maida's been doing to talk about the culture in each one of those places and how we can help help keep it as people do move. Not that everybody in that community has to move to that sister community, but it is a way that we can help tie people that have lived together and have shared experiences together to a new place.
That's great. And, did you want to follow that up, Mark?
I just a reflection is that it seems like also in a larger urban setting like maybe Hammond, which is a bigger community, that also a local institution like a church might be a focal point for folks to be together again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we've also talked about, is there like kind of a clearinghouse for communities that would like to be receiving communities where they can say, these 6 communities would love to have people from the coast. And so you can kind of go shopping together as a family or friends or things like that.
We've got 2 people with hands raised, and I want to see that Honora posted a question. Did you look at how existing receiving communities that are overburdened and overwhelmed can catch up and be better? And I'm not positive, but I bet since you live in Prairieville, you're talking about Prairieville.
Yeah, we've talked about this in our working group, right? Yeah, absolutely. So it's really the same methodology for those communities. It's the same methodology to look at what are their resilience gaps and how do they, and it's really, I think, easier for them to communicate for federal funding that we already have people and we already are sort of behind on our, whether it's infrastructure or, hospitals or whatever it is.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so federal funds. David Holcomb, I believe you had your hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Well, it was sort of question and comment because, it's very tragic that people have to leave their homes and communities and all that. I mean, so this is a monumental tragedy. But Alexandria received probably 10,000 people from Katrina that became permanent residents. So, I mean, this has already experienced that because we're a little bit higher up and all that. But I mean, this is a sort of existential question because somebody gets forced out of their home. Why in the world would they want to come to a place with a 22,000 per capita income, 15% college graduates in a state that's 50th out of 50 in their health outcomes? So, I mean, if you're going to move, I mean, go to Wisconsin or Colorado or someplace that you can actually get an education and make a living and get your family out of poverty. So, are we looking at this correctly or not?
Well, I think that's part of, I'm not a data person. Like I usually go from the other end, from the people side, and then work the other direction. But I think that's what the data is trying to help us with, or what are those things that are keeping us at $22,000 a year? Or what are the things that are keeping us away from higher education? How can we fill those gaps? I don't want people to go to Wisconsin. I want them to stay. And I want our communities to know how to fix some of those things to support the people that live there.
Well, I mean, I'm ran the Office of Public Health for many years here, and this is all about social determinants of health. And the social determinants are essentially income and educational level. And so the communities, not all of them, but some of these receiving communities have, like us, terrible per capita incomes and very low education, and of course, consequentially, terrible health outcomes. And, I mean, it's nice if we can have people come here, but it would be nice if we also had people come here that bring something to the community, and everybody brings something. But what's really missing here is well-educated people that have higher incomes to bring up the whole economy. And I just don't see that happening. This has been a very stagnant area for decades, and it sort of continues to be so. And I don't think that's very attractive. If I was having to leave Dulac, I'm not sure I want to come to Alexandria or any place in Louisiana for that matter.
I'd like to add, though, that in Louisiana, family connections are so important. And so we are a sticky state, and people want to be able to drive to see family regularly, and so that is a major factor too.
Well, it's true, but being stuck in poverty and ill health, I'm not sure that that's so attractive.
Well, that discussion will keep going on. I think Simone, and that it's a really good interest. What drives people to move? Where do they migrate to? And we do know a lot of people are moving out of state, right? Haley, Maida, I think that's in your, a lot of people moving to other places. But
the whole state is depopulating.
The whole state is depopulating, right? I think Louisiana had 5 of the counties by percent in the U.S. in the top 10 number of counties that are losing population. I think Simone had her hand up. Do you want to ask a question, Simone?
A lot of the conversation is kind of covering it, and actually Craig's comment in the chat was very similar to my question. I guess the only other thing I'd add, I'd be curious if there's any references or specific examples of the point you're making, Haley, about how culture sort of survives and how that really has to happen with a critical mass of folks. So I was just curious about that.
Yeah, I can send some information on that. And actually, I talked with Craig as well, so he's a wealth of knowledge on exactly that. But I think a lot of that has to be really, really intentional. Are you familiar with the workshops that Maida has been doing? Yeah, and so we've talked about, can we do those workshops in both the receiving community and the community that might be migrating, to see what's important to both communities, and make sure that it's intentionally kept and intentionally passed down.
So I'm going to call on Craig, who posted a question. And Craig, do you mind reading it and also reminding everybody of the new report that's coming out?
Okay, I think I'm tuning in here. Yep. Well, I was asking Haley if she looked at some of the real fundamental issues. That some departures won't necessarily be related to an urge to go to safety, but when the community infrastructure falls apart, as these coastal parishes and counties in other states can't maintain the roads, can't rebuild the roads, can't sustain the schools, the fire departments, they're going to be their coastal infrastructure is going to be deteriorating. How do they then somehow coordinate with adjacent parishes or counties, or move their infrastructure to safer parts of the parish or territory of jurisdiction? So I'm curious how that might be encouraged, facilitated, to accommodate those people who don't want to move a long distance but want to stay close.
Absolutely. So thank you, Craig, for that. It's interesting, when we were doing the interviews, we talked with some planners from Lake Charles. And so they're doing exactly this with Cameron Parish right now. Because I think there's maybe 600 to 800 people left in Cameron Parish now. Many of them have moved to Lake Charles because, again, it's just a little bit of a jump up. And so Lake Charles is looking at, how do we sort of operate those two parishes as one? Because there's not a critical mass for taxes, basically, is what you're kind of referring to, right, Craig? There's not enough taxes to take care of the infrastructure and to serve the people that are there, because there's not that many people left. But when I talked about people accessing family land for cattle, for instance, that was in Cameron, and people drive back and forth. They said even the highway going down is traveled very heavily every day. And so that's kind of like a new thing that they're thinking about, like, how do we maintain the highway? Because people are going back and forth to see friends, to see family, to check on their homes, to check on their family land or their cattle or whatever it is, are going down for LNG daily. And so that whole area has kind of shifted the use. And so how do you keep that in mind and service that a little bit differently? So the long story there is that the two parishes are working together to accomplish that, because they're sharing residents now.
Okay.
Which is really cool.
I
mean, that's a really cool way to think about it.
So I just got a reminder that we only have time for one more question. I know Mike Rogers has his hand up. Keegan had his hand up. Keegan, did you get your question answered?
Yeah, I was just going to ask her to talk a little bit about what their plans are with the report and how they're interacting with the communities. But I think she talked a little bit about that. Sort of.
Okay. So Mike, we'll take your question. You'll be last. But here's what I want to remind you: we're going to just wrap this up with a bow and end our formal presentation, and we will have an informal discussion until 1:30. So if you have a question, I urge you to stick around for the informal discussion. I also urge you to look at the chat. For instance, Craig posted about the National Academy of Sciences report on receiving communities that's coming out next spring. Other people have made other points. Amy Lesson has pointed out that they're talking about some of these issues in the culture planning group. And so check out the chat. Mike, you're muted.
I realize that now. Hi, Haley. So Maida mentioned family connections. And so like, I guess when I think of this type of thing a lot, I think about chain migration quite a bit. And maybe you mentioned this, but is there a way in kind of like identifying these potential receiving communities? Is there a way to factor in chain migration? Is there a way to do that? I mean, again, maybe you spoke to it and I missed it.
Yeah. Yes, I think it should be. I don't think we really like bake that into the methodology, but I think we should, look at that some more. For sure.
So everybody, we've got the hope, and I want to remind everybody now we're through with our questions. We will start again on an informal in just a minute. We just got a few more slides to go. I want to remind you that if you have not signed on to the position statement, you should sign on today. If you voted for it, it didn't mean you signed on. You can just scan that, or you can go to louisianafolklore.org and sign on there. But it is one of our ways to advocate for the human dimension in coastal land loss. I want to remind you of upcoming working group meetings. The Culture and Coastal Planning meeting, which people were posting about in the chat. It's going to be held, the next meeting's Monday, November the 27th, but they have another one December the 11th. For that one, you get in touch with Theo Hilton. You should be able to see the email contact right there. Theo is looking for a co-convener. So if you were interested in this discussion or in other culture and coastal planning discussions, please think about joining into that. All right. Artists and Tradition Bearers is going to be happening Wednesday, November the 29th. You can see it's at BCC. That's the way to join that group. The Preparing Receiving Communities, Haley Blakeman, you get to see her again. She and Tracy Birch will be able to meet with you on Thursday, January the 11th at January 18th at 11 a.m. And Haley, y'all are starting your meetings there and y'all are co-convening, right? Yeah, okay. Other groups, Protecting Collections. The next meeting is Thursday, December the 14th at 10 a.m. It'll meet mostly on Thursdays. If you would like to work on with archivists or protecting groups, please think about joining that group. All of these groups are running through volunteer labor, and this is a labor of love for everyone. Okay, our next Bayou gathering will be on Friday, December the 15th at noon, right here. It'll be Sandy Nguyen, who founded the Coastal Communities Consulting Group, CCC, which has been so active in doing advocacy work in the Vietnamese community and in New Orleans East and other places as well. We can't wait to hear from Sandy Nguyen. So be here and join us. We're also having a series of culture and climate conversations. We are taking the gathering to the public, and these are being organized by Dr. Teresa Parker, who is at Tulane University, and it's being so we just had a series of these at Rougarou. If you got to see any of them, we are going to be making some of those videos are going to be accessible for people. So we're in the process of doing that now. Look for more information on culture and climate conversations. And also the Community Voices Project. We are making our working groups more inclusive, or we're working to do it. We want a wide variety of participation as possible. We have Jamie DiGiorno, who's an anthropologist, is working on organizing this effort for us. If you know someone that would be willing to participate in one of our working groups, but just needed a small stipend to help them, let us know. We have a list of people, but we're always interested in what your ideas are. Okay, stick around. We'll have informal sharing until 1:30. These are the ways you can get in touch with us.